We've said for several months that Marketplace Connections is about three things. Number one, it's about business connections, and that's a connection that is important to Marketplace Connections. So we hope that takes place, and I know of stories where that has taken place. Secondly, it's about friendship, building friendship, and I could kind of feel that this morning. You know, we're not strangers to each other. We kind of know some of our stories, so on and so forth. And all of you have become friends on this journey together. And then lastly, spiritual connections, that we're all trying to grow in our relationship with God. And that part of what we do is the spiritual connection side of it. So I think those three things continue to illustrate what it is we're trying to do in Marketplace Connections. And I have a good challenge for you. This is a great, wonderful environment. We would love to have you invite new people to come. So my challenge and encouragement for you in 2015 is be thinking about your network, because all of you represent hundreds of people all around the city. And so I'd love to have you invite some new people to come. But again, it's not about numbers, 10 is great, 15 is great. We'd love to spread the environment that is in Marketplace Connections. So I don't have a brochure for you this morning because we're going to tweak it and change it, but I'll email it to you and you can download it yourself. So we'll get it to you in the next few days. And it's on the website too. Yeah. Thanks, Ian. Jay has held a number of positions in London at an accountant's firm now called Deloitte. I'm sure you've heard of Deloitte. And then here's an interesting phrase. He was headhunted. But you still look pretty together. You still have it on. Good. Didn't shrink it, yeah. Into a Standard Chartered bank. He's been a CEO of their securities group. Done business around the world, Hong Kong, Singapore. You were just in Delhi recently for a couple of months, about 3 months or so. And Danielle, it's good to have you back from your travels also. Yeah. Jay recently moved to Bellevue with Danielle from New York City, where he worked with the Christian Union, an Ivy League group focused on leadership development for a nonprofit. And I've spent a couple of times with Jay, just down at Starbucks, having coffee together. And it's always fun when you meet somebody that has that diverse experience and is really passionate about life and business and how the spiritual dimension fits into his life and business. So we're going to have many, many more good conversations, I'm sure. It's a delight to have you, Jay, so come and share with us on excellence, please.
Yeah, so thank you for sponsoring, for those people who sponsor this group. I think it's a wonderful group to reach out to people who need to hear the message that a lot of us have already heard. And that's why I'm excited about this group, that it's not just another club for us to feel good, but to reach out to those who need that. So thank you really very much. Now, my name is Jayanth, but you can call me Jay for short, and Jay. Even my grandfather couldn't pronounce my name, so he called me Giant. My wife calls me Jay. so Jay, if you're looking for me on social media, LinkedIn, it'll be Jayant Shukla, but if you're looking for me on Facebook, it'll be Jay Shukla. Now let me see if this thing works. I guess the question is that we're talking about today is excellence, and I have absolutely no doubt that actually any of you could talk about this subject, and we have been talking about it on our tables this morning. But I guess think for a moment back to a time that things were not excellent, and that's what we were talking about at our table. Perhaps you went to an expensive restaurant and got served a lousy meal, overcooked vegetables, small tiny piece of meat, snooty service. Perhaps you bought a suit at an expensive suit, and within 3 months it was falling apart, or it lost shape, or thread was coming out, the buttons were falling off. I mean, or perhaps you just had a bad hair day. All of us. You're lucky there, Jim. But the exactly. So the question is, I mean, how does that make you feel if you just go back to your own personal time when things were not excellent? How did that make you feel? And I guess that's the starting point of what I want to say, is that when we look at excellence, very often it's easy to contrast that with things that we are of excellence to us. And I was going to do an exercise this morning talking about excellence, but we've already done that, so thanks for saving me the time. And I'll launch into it. But yeah, there are things of excellence. Who could think of something that is excellent, something maybe that they've purchased in a store? What could be something that's excellent?
I bought a speaker yesterday for my laptop,
Right.
Bose speaker from Matt Hudson's recommendation, and it is really excellent.
Right,
I paid for it,
right.
but it's excellent.
So when you switch it on and play music through it, what does it make you feel?
Makes me feel like it was a good investment,
Right,
worth the money. Quality is up here.
right. You kind of feel content and happy that it was a good decision that you made. Anybody else?
My wife got me a Kindle for Christmas, and I'd never really thought too much about it. But every day I use it, and it's almost like there's another pleasant surprise that I come across. I find something else that I can do with it, and it's easy to use, and it seems to be good quality, and the battery lasts for long. I mean, it's everything you'd want in a device.
Right.
And I thought it was just going to be for reading books.
So the battery lasts long. There's lots of content that you can access through it. It's exceeded your expectations of what that device would be.
Every day it does.
Every day.
It's a new surprise.
And how does that make you feel when you switch it on and you start using it?
Well, it makes me feel like I know what I'm doing.
Right, right.
I guess that's the simplest way. I'm a bit of a troglodyte, but this is something that it's so easy to use. It makes anybody feel like a tech genius.
Yeah, you kind of
like Matt.
puts you on top of the world. I'm a tech genius. Yeah, so I guess excellence is that aspect of feeling. And as I say, that there's not a single person around here who couldn't be giving this talk instead of me. I just happen to be it for this morning. So it's my little experience of excellence, and I'll try and walk you through it. That's a little bit of who I am. Family. Now let me see if I can get this thing to work. Now what do I do there? So my parents, my siblings, my dear wife who's here at the moment, our wedding day, youngest son who graduated from NYU was just here in Seattle. I was just trying to tempt him to come to live in Seattle from New York. My older boy who's an entertainer and a filmmaker. My stepdaughter who graduated from Columbia is now a journalist, also a musician. That's a bit of the family, very quickly. That's something about me. My journey from a young college person to an old grizzly via corporate life and the sun-seeking pleasure days. But I guess a business that I ran, so I'm not just a boring corporate guy and a professional guy, a banker, but I also did run a fun business, did create a fun business and run a fun business for a while, just an aside. But I guess I grew up in New Delhi and surrounded by what I felt was excellence. I mean, President Obama has just been there. He's witnessed a bit of this parade that goes out on the 26th of January every year. Buildings from days of yore, created with such elegance and perfection, excellence, modern buildings, places of worship. That's a Baha'i temple in the shape of a lotus, but also pictures that flash up which are of not excellence, pictures that can kind of create that sense of mediocrity or fear in you that yes, everything's excellent around you, but it's easy to slip into something which is less than. And so that's a bit of the early influences that were around me, pushing me towards excellence. As John said, I had lived in London, England, and some world-class cities that I've lived in, really. I mean, just been quite incredible. Was a chartered accountant for 10 years, in audit, a professional, probably in my career, probably seen about 150 organizational units from the inside out, in terms of what works, what doesn't work, the successes, challenges of those. Lived in, after London, England, lived in Hong Kong, which is, what an amazing city that is. I don't know how many people have been to Hong Kong over here, but that is just an amazing city, the way it buzzes with entrepreneurship and everything works there. And that's where I was in banking, investment banking, retail banking, consumer banking. Moved to Singapore, another world-class city that prides itself on excellence in everything they do. It's only a small island state of about 4 or 5 million people, but probably one of the largest foreign currency reserves in the world, all accumulated through investing in precision in the different industries that they have. And then lastly, New York. Hang on. Where I've just come from. In fact, I grew up 5 years of my life in New York, surrounded by excellence, a city that is pretty ruthless. If you're not excellent, you're out of business in 2 minutes. Nobody wants to really talk to you. Nobody wants to have anything to do with you if you're not just on the ball and presenting yourself in an excellent way every minute. So I guess excellence has always been around me in some form or the other. But alongside that, I've always been aware of something that's bigger than me, and something that kind of makes me wonder, has always made me wonder when I look at the flowers in the field, or the birds in the air, or the mountains and the seas and the oceans, or my own body, or the world that we live in, and the way it hangs in this universe in such balance, that there must be something bigger than just the bricks and mortar and the processes that I learned as an auditor, and the perfection that one always wants to get to. There must be something bigger than that, and for sure, one of the inspirational, yes, I have been lost in a number of different searches for that excellence in a number of different spiritual journeys, which have ended up in my looking at that verse in the Bible, which is John 10:10, which says that that He came to give me a full life, to give me life and for me to have it to the fullest. So what does that full life mean? And that's always been the back of my mind, to say, well, how can I honor that sacrifice that was made and live that full life? Not perfection, as we talked about, and as an auditor, I learned pretty early that the audit opinion, which is maybe a paragraph on a balance sheet on a company's performance, is not true and correct. So it's not that the numbers all add up, but it's true and fair. In other words, it presents that there is a grayness about that definition of excellence. Now, I'm not going to define excellence any more than, but Tom Peters did. He was the first one who kind of talked about that whole journey in his search for excellence, which I'm not going to read that out or even try, because he himself claimed that it was an afterthought. The whole thing was an afterthought in terms of why he wrote it, but it got everybody thinking about excellence. That's probably, organizationally speaking, some sort of a history of excellence in the organizational field. And I don't know if most of you would have heard of it. The Kaizen, the Japanese practice of continuous improvement, TQM, which became the big thing that the Malcolm Baldrige Award. TQM was the U.S. Navy started that whole movement off. Malcolm Baldrige Award was something that everybody coveted back in the 80s and 90s. I don't know if it's still around. It may well be still around. ISO 9001 was a certification that everybody sought, whether you were in manufacturing, whether you were in service, whether you were, whatever it is that you were doing, you were proud to say that I'm ISO 9001 certified. Then came lean manufacturing, which looked at the elimination of waste, not having to rework things again, pretty much what you were talking about. Six Sigma, which was which was something that Motorola kind of brought forward and was known worldwide for their Six Sigma methodologies, which brought together excellence in the marketplace. I went to Motorola University in Chicago back in the 90s, and it was truly quite impressive to go to Schaumburg as part of that journey. The whole practice of benchmarking, so it wasn't just what you were doing, but who's the best in class and how can you benchmark against them. And so people keep, so organizationally we've been striving for excellence for many years, and now it's the EFQM model which continues. In my organizational consulting, we learned that there are interdependencies on every aspect of our lives. So to be excellent, you just don't look at one aspect, but it's a whole collection, a whole bunch of things that are interdependent. And yet, when we look at some of the world's greatest corporations, we see that excellence very often led to failure. And again, one doesn't need to kind of go into the Enrons and the WorldComs and the Lehman Brothers and the Motorola's, how all these once mighty corporations have collapsed. Now, the interesting thing is that they all had quality systems. They all had ISO 9000. As we know, Motorola was Six Sigma, the leader in that whole process. But yet, the cost has been incredible in terms of jobs, in terms of loss to investors. Look, Arthur Andersen even went under as a result of the Enron collapse. Motorola, the mighty Motorola, has been sold to Google, and Google has now sold it on to Lenovo. So it's gone down to 6,000 employees from 125,000, and that citadel of quality that we knew in Schaumburg. Lehman Brothers, the most admired Fortune 500 company, the year before its collapse. And the common thing is the people. Look, Jeff Lay was the son of a Baptist preacher and an Ivy League graduate. Similarly with Andrew Skilling, very educated person. Bernie Ebbers, talked about as one of the five biggest crooks in U.S. corporate history. And I think only Madoff has overtaken him from that point of view. Lehman Brothers, it was all the partners acting in collusion that created the situation where such an amazing organization collapsed and is no more. Similarly with Motorola, Chris Galvin, for all his efforts, didn't quite understand the culture that had been created in Motorola, people warring against each other, competing with one another, dog eat dog, just for the sake of a bonus or for the sake of advancement. The warring tribes that were created couldn't manage that. So I guess it's organizational excellence boils down to individuals. I guess that's the short story. And what is it about individuals? So personal excellence is something that I learned as a gymnast in school. I represented my school, my university, my state. Gymnastics too tall to really make the world stage, but that's what when I first started discovering excellence. Those toes had to be perfectly pointed. The shape had to be absolutely perfect. The score had to be 10. And there was a big cost to pay. I mean, there was a cost in terms of the time that you committed, the physical injuries. My bad shoulder today is directly as a result of a fall I had in gymnastics. So there is a cost to pay for personal excellence, and I'm sure each one of you have gone through an aspect of personal excellence in your own journeys. So individual failure, why do we fail as individuals? And this is a management theory that we learn, theory X and theory Y, which if you translate it into spiritual terms, theory X is that man was born sinful and needs a whole bunch of corrective actions to take him to that path that we all long for, to a time when we'll all be in an excellent place. Or theory Y, which is that man was born perfect, but it's the environment and it's everything out there that kind of breeds the imperfections. So two theories of individual failure. In the corporate setting, of course, it's termed slightly different, somewhat differently, and a lot of management practices follow theory X and theory Y. Now, individual development in my consulting work, in my practice, we talk a lot in terms of goal clarity with organizations. I mean, there's that famous story which you may have heard in a different way. But if there were, four men working in a field, digging dirt in a field, first one, when asked, why are you doing this, said, well, I don't know, I'm just digging the field. Somebody told me to dig the field. The second one says, well, I'm digging a ditch. Third one says, well, we're building a wall. And the fourth one says, well, we're laying the foundations for a new city that's going to be planted in this field, created in this field. So, what the goal is, what I'm supposed to do, what you're supposed to do, these all causes conflict a lot, lack of clarity with why I'm doing it, what the ultimate place is, how we communicate with each other, and how my ego interferes in the proper functioning and working of a team, and what my individual values are, whether I really value integrity, honesty, excellence, all those things all contribute to the pursuit of excellence that one sees. Now, that is a typical psychologist's view of a pathway to individual excellence, and that's one that I use in my practice. By the way, I transitioned from being all those things that John mentioned about me. I'm now in human capital development, organizational development. That's my field now, helping individuals and organizations reach excellence in whatever they do. And that is at the basis of really what one does. And it all starts with values. Because if I value, I don't know, if my belief is, if my value is waste not, want not, then my thought is that, well, I better just take what I'm going to be eating, and the feeling when I leave something on the plate is going to be a feeling of remorse. So I'm going to make sure that I actually put it into my mouth and finish it off. So that's the chain of reactions, and you can all think of behaviors. We were talking about my wife makes a lot of puddles in the house. So what she values and how that leads to the behavior of puddles, which I then have to pick up at the end of the day. So here's an interesting exercise that I very often make people do, and I'll pass around these sheets. Thanks very much, John. So if you look at this first page, which is on values, lots more here. There we go. Thank you. So it's a page which talks about values, and that's the starting point of everybody's individual journey. Sorry, Jeff. Everybody's individual journey starts off on that. And there's a whole bunch of values that are listed here and help people understand and identify what their values are, because very often we don't have a clear picture of what our own personal values are. We know what our company brand values are. We have some rough idea of our spiritual values, Christian values, Hindu values, Buddhist values, whatever those values are, but we can't put down 5 or 6 things that are really very important to us. So the first thing in looking at our search for excellence is our values. This is an interesting exercise to do, because the first thing is to say, well, how important is it to me on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the most important? You can kind of rank that on that. And the second one is, well, how closely am I walking that value? And look at the gap between. So for me, connecting to others may be 9, but I'm buried in my work and I never speak to my wife, so I'm actually at 2. So there's a gap between the value and the walk, and that's very often the path that one needs to take to rectifying one behavior is to look at that. The other aspect is thoughts, and that's the one at the back. It's called catabolic bingo. And thoughts are very much the lens with which we see the world. So a lot of negative thoughts there, a lot of negative feelings and thoughts that come into there. Another very useful exercise to see how we're doing is to take this sheet and over a period of 2 days, mark in each box, put in each box a little line every time one of those feelings turns up. So if I've kind of irritated with my wife because of the puddles, I can mark it down once, twice, and at the end of the day, I can add up all the little lines I've got in a gate system or whichever way you choose to use it, and say, well, what are those things that are interfering with my achieving excellence, and what is it that's coming in the way? That's a model that I use, and it is pretty complicated, but it's basically talking about the same thing, that our thoughts create our feelings and emotions, create the results that we look at. Starting at the very bottom of the scale, I'm sorry it's not clearer, but the bottom of the scale at level 1 is really some sort of a victim thinking. In other words, and that kind of moves from victim into conflict, into responsibility, concern, responsibility, synthesis, and being totally non-judgmental. And that's the kind of pathway one can say could be a pathway to some form of sanctification, or if one uses the jargon, or just simply to say, well, that's what I want to get away from. And say, so for instance, if I'm at level 1, which is victim, how I show up as a victim is that, well, I couldn't do anything about it anyway. It's okay, we're having this argument about puddles, and I just walk away. It's like, okay, you win. It's you keep your puddles, and I'll just be quiet. I'll just sit there on my couch and do nothing about my life, and that's and of course the important thing is that we all go through these levels every day in some form or the other. But the question is, where are you predominantly in these, and especially under stress, where do you end up? Win-lose is the typical is a lot of behavior out in the marketplace is that win-lose. That's how we're programmed. In other words, I've got to get it, and it doesn't really matter how important it is to you. But I've got to achieve my goal, I've got to achieve my financial target, I've got to get my goods delivered on time, I've got to get this report to my client, so I'm going to scream and shout at whoever comes in my way. And of course that doesn't lead to excellence, it doesn't lead very much further than temporary success. We need anger at some point. Righteous anger is something that we talk about quite often. We need, because that does motivate us. It does get us out of our victim thinking to say, well, I can't do it, it's his fault, or that supplier never delivered this stuff to me, or that supplier cut corners and therefore my customer's unhappy with me. That's we need the anger to say, well, I'm going to do something about it. I'm going to give my supplier a piece of my mind and say exactly what was wrong with it. So we do need that anger. Then the next level comes into this I win and sometimes you do too, and that really shows up very often when we offer a bonus to somebody. You say, well, you get this done on time and you get an extra $10 or $100 or $1,000 or whatever it is. And that's really pretty much, although it's a step in the right direction, but it's very much that, I'm going to get my way, I'm going to get my goal, I'll give you a little carrot along the way. If you can if you can do it on time, you get the carrot. If not, sorry. So that's definitely a step in the right direction. That's when we really start stepping into this whole realm of excellence in level 4, which is where we have concern for the other person. Say, well, how do we kind of, how can I serve you? And sometimes it's confused with the victim thing. So sometimes it shows up as a pseudo level 4. Sometimes it shows up as a pseudo concern. because it's really saying that, I don't want to stand up for myself. I'll just let you do what it is. And it's like seems like an altruistic way of saying I care for you, but actually it doesn't. It just means that I'm hiding in my own comfort zone. So how else would that show up? I mean, anybody got any thoughts around how else that would show up in your experience in the marketplace? A you-win type of situation.
Can I ask you another question?
Yep, sure.
I may be getting there.
Yeah,
Let's say you're coaching a Seahawk fan.
right,
The Seahawk fan is stuck on number 2, and,
right,
but they want to get to number 6.
right.
How would you coach them to get to number 6?
A number of ways, but ultimately, it's again what we were talking about at our table was, you've got to show them the cost of what they're doing, and what it's costing the team. So, whether it's creating a positive and uplifting and driving force for the whole team, or whether it's putting everybody off and making people feel afraid of moving forward and scared to kind of make a mistake. So, showing people the cost of failure, the cost of making, the cost of what they're doing, I think is going to be the only way, motivating factor to change very often.
I think your previous question, I think there's a lot of you win. I was just thinking of the Kindle environment where, the service that he gets through that Kindle, you win in that.
Right.
I remember my product getting the Kindle, and he opened it up, and it was like, well, hi, Cliff. Welcome to your Kindle, Cliff.
Right.
It's like it is for you.
Right, right.
It's not for any, And
Yeah.
so you automatically feel,
I win.
I win.
Yeah, yeah.
This is, I feel, and
This is a good deal for
it's
me.
great, and each time there's that little kind of there feels like, I was just saying yesterday, if you call Amazon, they will say, hey, don't wait on the phone, we'll call you right back. Just leave your phone number.
Yeah.
And they call you.
Oh, wow.
And they don't call you 2 hours later. They call you within 5 minutes.
Oh,
I mean,
really?
it's like a serious thing where, and so it's that level of concern, service that they want you to win.
Oh,
But
yeah,
I
that's a
think-
good.
And you can feel it.
I think they're at 5 and 6, because not only, now I get this Kindle, but now I want to get a leather case to go around.
Right.
And books for $3, I can't go to Costco and buy a paperback book for $3, but I can go and get one from Amazon. So all of a sudden,
Right.
they're winning
They're
too.
winning too.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with that.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah. So, I mean, but very often these things can be faked, but you can feel when it's not faked, right? You can feel that it's coming. Like my wife flew from Europe yesterday, British Airways, contrasting the service between British Airways and
Surprised that service
and
was
some
so
o-
excellent. I flew British Airways, I think 15 years ago, and they were kind of snooty and, not that great. And yesterday I could really feel that they genuinely cared about you. And, compared to Qatar Airways or Singapore Airlines, who's top of the service,
Yeah.
I really felt British Airways, they really cared. Whereas Singapore Airlines, they are very good at service, but somehow a lot of the girls and the guys are kind of posing sometimes, or they're young and beautiful, but these ladies were older. No, but they're older, but they really genuinely.
Right. Yeah.
I was surprised.
And you're right. That does that.
Airways thumbs up.
And that does lead into this, Jim, this whole aspect of, the whole pie gets bigger, the whole cake gets bigger because you're buying and they're selling and everybody's winning. John?
Just 3 minutes.
Oh, 3.
Fun about hitting the time, right?
I like it.
Feel really good.
Well, 3 minutes is perfect, and we can talk a lot more about this. But another example of 5 and 6 comes to me in terms of retailers who are partnering with their suppliers. And I don't know whether Starbucks is still like that, but certainly when in the beginning, when they're tied up with coffee growers, the quality aspects, the excellence of the quality that the coffee that was being grown would match the aspirations of the drinkers that Starbucks was reaching out to in the consumer markets, and then the whole pie was getting bigger, both for the consumers, the producers, the customers, everybody. So people stopped seeing it as a win-lose thing. I make that extra little buck, or I cut corners here and make that extra little bit of profit. Now, what gets in the way? What gets in the way? There's since I've only got 3 minutes, gremlins are those little whispers in the ear, the little guy who sits over here and says you can't do it, you're not good enough. Fundamentally, that's what he's saying in some form or the other, and very often that takes some digging out. People don't very often realize that there's a little voice that's saying, whether it came from a father that said you'll never make the grade, or whether it came from a teacher or some other influence in your life that says you'll never make it. But that is a thing that needs to be dug out and dealt with. What are assumptions? Assumptions are things that just because something happened in the past, it's going to happen again. So it's our past experience. Just because somebody let me down once, that doesn't mean I don't trust people ever again in my life again. And those are very often things that have to be dug out. Interpretations, down to aspects of our family culture, our environmental culture. That's the lens and the filter that we have when we look at the world in terms of, I don't know, it could be that something as simple as, well, all Muslims are jihadis, or all Christians are self-righteous, something like that. Something that we've been taught as young people to look at the world in a particular way. Limiting beliefs, those that restrict us in any particular way. What could be a limiting belief? I don't know. For me, maybe it could be I'm too old to do this, or I'm too sick, or I'm too tired, or whatever it is. So I guess my questions that I would ask you, since we have already had some question and answer time, is to think about these 3 aspects today. Well, what is your personal vision of excellence? If you can write it down, if you can think about it, step back for a minute and say, well, what is my personal vision of excellence for myself? And also try and think of some of the things that are coming away in the way of your achieving that vision of excellence for yourself. And if we had time, we would love to kind of brainstorm strategies in how to overcome those blocks. And that last bit is a little bit of a commercial for me, is that's the name of my firm, Joint Force LLC, Joint Force with my clients, with my maker, to make things better. I was trained as a certified coach with the International Coach Federation, so I've moved from being a CPA to being a certified coach in the last 40 years with lots of in-betweens. And my training comes from that organization, IPEC. So that's all I have to say. 3 minutes up.
Thank you.
Right.